Edmund Dantes shivered in the rowboat as they made their way to the island. It was so early that the sky in the east hadn't yet turned orange, and yet it had been a long night already. Their captain was dead, claimed by brain fever. Dantes had been the first mate, up until just after midnight, when, with the passing of the captain, Edmund rose to acting captain of the Farian. He had been by the captain as he passed, holding the man's sweaty hand, hearing his final words, and receiving the late captain's final order. Even if the man hadn't been captain, Edmund still respected the last wishes of a dying man. His first act as captain would be to carry out the final orders of his predecessor. Besides, it was only delivering a letter, and the island wasn't even that far off their route. They were ahead of schedule anyway, and Edmund could spend the whole day on the island, if necessary, and still make it back to Marseille, his home, to see his father and Mercedes, the love of his life. Dante stared ahead as they approached the island, lights glowing in the early morning. No doubt guards patrolled it all hours of the night and day. That was definitely true of the sea. They had nearly missed the British and their fellow French ships sailing in, the ones that ceaselessly patrolled these waters, the ones that ensured that he didn't escape. He was now nothing, the nominal king of a rock in the Mediterranean, and yet, the most important man on the island of Elba had once been the most important man on the planet, conquering and ruling half of the known world before the rest of it overwhelmed him and defeated him. He was the Emperor, Napoleon, and Elba was not the kingdom he pulled from the bloody ashes of revolution, but one tossed to him by his enemies. It was where he had been exiled after he gained and lost the world. Edmund Dantes, the new captain of the Farian, knew all these things, and still, he had a sealed message for the Emperor's men from his late captain. Edmund was doing the right thing. He was respecting the wishes of the man who had been his superior, yes, but also his friend. He had no way of knowing that those orders, this trip, in the small hours of the morning, would change his life and the lives of everyone he knew forever. It would make him a hero and a traitor, a prisoner, a dead man, a noble and a genius. It would make him a pauper and a millionaire, and, one day, turn him into the Count of Monte Cristo. I'm Jason Weiser. From Bardic, this is Fictional. Three weeks later, as the Farian sat off the coast of its home port in Marseille, Danglars, the supercargo on the ship, watched Edmund Dantes with disgust. This man, this kid, this 19-year-old was going to be his captain. He was nearly 8 years older than Edmund, and didn't have the young man's ease of talking with the men on the ship, or really anyone at all. What Danglars lacked in social grace, he made up for in hard work and intelligence, and taking every opportunity that presented itself, no matter what that opportunity was. He watched Dantes and the shipowner, Monsieur Morel, laughing and chumming it up like idiots. Still, those idiots controlled his career. Then, Danglars remembered something. The stop at Elba. They had lost nearly 2 days, so the Farian could make some special trip there for Dantes to deliver a letter. He wondered if Dantes had told the shipowner about the stop. If not, it was Danglars' responsibility, nay, his obligation, to share the news. Danglars was the supercargo, so he was responsible for keeping track of the ship's inventory, as well as the sails. His role and that of the captain were almost equal positions on the ship. Almost. As such, Danglars was the next in line to give Morel his report. "So, you're tattling on your captain?" Morel asked. "Acting captain, sir," Danglars corrected his superior. "For now," Morel replied, but said that Dantes was a good man. If he, as Danglars presumed, went ashore for no good reason, then, yeah, he could be reprimanded. But Dantes didn't get to where he was by doing things for no good reason. Danglars was dismissed. Through clenched teeth, Danglars thanked his boss and left to go finish up his duties. Meanwhile, Morel had called over Dantes, learned about the captain's final order, and nodded his head. Morel stood up straight and looked left and right at all the men and women passing by on the deck of the ship. "And did you see him? How is he?" Morel asked the young captain. Edmund knew exactly who he was talking about, and nodded. He said it wasn't anything noteworthy. The Emperor had walked in for a few moments, and talked while the Marshal took the package into another room. Morrill smiled, and patted Edmund on the back. He knew Edmund was a good man, but he should probably be careful who he told about that letter. The monarchy had only been back in power for a few months, after all, and things were still shaky. If they'd known Edmund had taken a letter to Elba. Edmund shrugged. He didn't even know what was in the letter, and besides, no jury in the world would convict him for seeing his captain's final orders through. Morrill shrugged as well. If people got juries. Dantes had been gone a long time. People were scared. Regardless, it shouldn't be an issue. So what was he up to now? Well, Edmund was going to go see his father. And then Mercedes, Edmund replied. Morrill let on that she had been by 3 times while he was gone to ask for news of the ship. Then he went on to tell Edmund that he had a very beautiful mistress. Betrothed, Edmund corrected. Well, to some people they're one and the same. Not with us, sir, replied Dantes, turning a bit red. Hey, so before you go, what's your opinion of Danglars? Like, if you're captain, would you be upset if you didn't see him anymore? Morrill asked. Edmund stopped and thought about it. Did he get menacing vibes from Danglars almost constantly? Yeah, definitely. And did they almost fight to death on a rock in the middle of the Mediterranean called the Isle of Monte Cristo? Once. Was the bitterness that surrounded the men almost palpable? Oh, absolutely. But if Danglars had the confidence of his ship's owners, well, that was good enough for Edmund. Danglars watched from the opposite side of the ship, saw the men laughing and backslapping. He knew his attempt at sabotaging Dantes' rise hadn't been enough. Edmund Dantes would be his captain. Danglars' career would be over before it even began, unless Danglars did something about it. Mercedes belonged to a small ethnic group known as the Catalans. Originating from the region between France and Spain, this group of Catalans had traveled north and founded a village just outside of Marseille. For centuries, they avoided intermarrying with the people of the French city, which was why it wasn't completely out of the question that Mercedes' cousin, Fernand, was also trying to get with her. But you said you loved me, Fernand shouted. Oh my gosh, we are not having this conversation again. I said I loved you like a brother. It was in the same sentence. You can't just stop listening after the first 3 words. You are family, and our village is ridiculously small, so I can't not see you. The least you could do is not make this weird. Fernand shook his head. Not making it weird was too much to ask of his heart. Mercedes facepalmed. It was every day with this guy. She sat Fernand down and told him in no uncertain terms that she did not love him. She would never love him. He was a friend. But if he couldn't be content with that, he would just have to deal with it. By now, Fernand was crying. Again. And he looked to Mercedes. It had been months. What if he didn't come back? What if who doesn't come back? They both heard from the door. Mercedes and Fernand spun around to see Edmund Dantes standing at the door. Mercedes laughed, threw her hands up, and flew to her betrothed. The pair kissed and held each other. It had been months, and like any sea voyage, there was always the possibility that Edmund might not return. Edmund and Mercedes were so caught up reuniting that it took Edmund a minute to realize that there was a pale-faced guy bathed in rage sweat, glaring at him from the corner. Oh, hi there, strange man in my fiancé's house, shooting figurative daggers at me and hopefully not literal daggers too, Edmund greeted. Mercedes smiled and explained that this stranger wasn't an enemy, and he wasn't even a stranger. Besides Edmund, this was the man Mercedes loved most in the world. He was the only family she had left, and she loved him like a brother. Besides, if anything violent should happen to dear Edmund, the only man she loved romantically, by the way, she would just die. Edmund grinned and pulled Mercedes close. Well, that was sweet. From her embrace, Mercedes shook her head and stared with narrowed eyes directly at Fernand. If anything were to happen to Edmund, she would die. She would hang herself from one of the rafters, or throw herself in the sea, or poison herself. It didn't matter. She would die. Edmund laughed nervously. That's a really specific, but I'm back. Let's talk about something else. Anything else? Fernand swallowed hard. The message seeming to have gotten through, and he rushed to leave. He half-sobbed a goodbye to Mercedes, the only woman he would ever love, and ran from the house. He was barely out of earshot when he slumped over in a combination of tears, sobs, and spit. He had loved Mercedes since he was a boy. He had been her friend for years. He had always been there. And yet, that was all he would ever be. A friend. He would have to watch her marry some guy who left for weeks or months at a time. He would watch her have his children and watch them grow old together, all while living out his own life in agony. He had done everything right, he thought, and gritted his teeth. He had a right to her that Edmond Dantes did not. Wiping most of the tears from his face, Fernand turned on his heel to challenge Edmond to a duel. Mercedes might hate him for it, but if he killed Edmond, then at least the man wouldn't be able to marry her. And if Fernand died, at least he wouldn't have to live with all this pain. He started marching back to his nemesis when Carissa caught his attention. Carissa was shouting at him to come have a seat. They had wine. Danglars had just gotten paid, and he was buying, so they had a lot of wine. Deciding to put a pin in dueling a young man to death, Fernand took a sad seat with Danglars and Carissa, enjoying the conversation already in progress. Carissa was a neighbor of Edmond Dantes and his father, and Carissa was also well on his way to getting blackout drunk in the early afternoon. Little Edmond was going places, and that made Carissa a little angry. He had given the young man his first ever franc, and he'd been bleeding the family dry for years now. Immediately after Edmond left on his last voyage, Carissa knew the young man had left an invalid father with a sum of money to survive on for weeks. Almost as soon as Edmond's ship was out of sight, Carissa had knocked on the Dantes door and demanded the immediate payment of the debts the family owed him. Since the elder Dantes was an honorable man, he gave Carissa the money, and sure, he nearly starved to death while Edmond was gone, but at least they were settled up. Now, Edmond was set to be captain of the Pharian and collect 100 louis pay and a share of the profits from every trip. They would soon be richer than Carissa. Edmond had even offered to loan Carissa money that morning when he stopped by to say hi. That's why, when his friend Danglars met him in the alley outside of Edmond's house and said that he was getting drinks and that, more importantly, he was buying drinks, Carissa was more than happy to partake. He did think the choice of place was odd, though, right on the edge of town. Still, free wine was free wine, and as he started on his second bottle, Carissa began to feel not so bad about Dantes and his father. That's when he saw another young man who could use a little more wine and a little less worry. Fernand had dropped into the seat next to his friend, Carissa, who very sensitively asked if Mercedes had rejected him again. Oh. It's probably because Dantes was back in town, and she was in love with him, right? I wonder when they're getting married. Fernand, do you know when they're getting married? You know, I'm really surprised you put up with that. Though, I suppose you actually have to have a chance with a woman to consider the man she really loves to be a rival, so I guess that makes sense. Anyway, you weren't the only man put up by Dantes coming back. Danglars here is going to have to work under that 19-year-old. I mean, if he gets to keep his job. I don't know if he told you, but Edmond challenged him to a duel that he chickened out of on the Isle of Monte Cristo. And when your boss threatens to kill you, not great for your career prospects. Oh man, I'm having a good time. Can we get some more wine? Waiter, more wine? Why does everyone look so angry? Danglars could see that Carissa didn't mean anything by it. He was just drunk. Fernand, however, was not so understanding. He broke down again. Carissa squinted, looking over Fernand's sobbing shoulder. Did he see? Hey! It was Edmond! And who was he here with? Oh my gosh, was that Mercedes? Wow. Yeah. It all made sense now. He could see why Fernand was a sobbing pile of self-pity. Carissa yelled out, beckoning the pair to join them, but Danglars stifled him, telling him to be better behaved. More like Fernand here. And let the lovers make love. Be in love and peace. Fernand sobbed again. It was too late. Edmond and Mercedes walked by the table, and Edmond, forgetting the earlier unpleasantness regarding his dad nearly starving to death, waved hello to Carissa, as well as Danglars, and that creepy guy who watched him make out with Mercedes when he first returned. He announced that the wedding feast would be in a few days, and that the betrothal dinner was tomorrow, and they were all invited. Wow, Carissa slurred. Even Fernand? Edmond replied that his future wife's family was like his own family, so yes, they would both be sad if he wasn't there to witness it. The wedding would take place the day after tomorrow, and then they would have 3 months together before the Pharian left again. They had something they needed to do in Paris as part of the last commission of his late captain. Danglars knew all about it, but then they'd be off on their honeymoon. The pair said goodbye to the trio drinking at the table and left, With the mention of Paris, Danglars smiled. Caderousse's head pounded as he climbed to the upstairs room of the tavern. He had kind of blacked out sometime around 3 p.m. the day before, and somehow managed to wake up in his own bed that morning. The last thing he remembered was Danglars handing him a bottle and yelling for something from the waiter. As opposed to nursing a hangover and evaluating his life choices, Caderousse, through the haze of inebriation, remembered that he had been invited to Edmund and Mercedes' betrothal dinner, where there would be more free food and drinks. Possibly thinking that self-reflection would be more effective with a drink in hand, Caderousse answered the door when Danglars was knocking, and, despite the sun being so very bright, he followed the man to the betrothal dinner. With the exception of Monsieur Morel, the owner of the ship Edmund was likely to captain, the dinner was a veritable who's who of lower middle-class Marseille. There was Edmund and his father, Mercedes and Fernand, he and Danglars, and about a dozen of Edmund's sailor friends. They settled in at the table, and that was when they received the news. Monsieur Morel stood first, saying that before they got into the important stuff, he had an announcement. Morel had spoken to his partner, and Edmund was going to be the new captain of the Pharian when she set sail again in 3 months. The sailors cheered. They drank that. Caderousse, who would drink to just about anything, joined them and turned to Danglars. This must be eating him up, except, surprisingly, he saw the man chuckling and clapping his hands. Caderousse shook. Ugh. He had never seen Danglars really smile before, and it was a pretty unnerving sight. Then, he remembered something. Danglars' laughing had triggered his recollection. It was yesterday, at the restaurant right on the edge of town. A prank. He had called for paper and ink and a pen, and, because restaurants were also apparently convenience stores, the waiter brought them. He chuckled that sort of strange, unnerving chuckle as he wrote. Was Danglars left-handed? He had written with his left hand yesterday, but he was eating with his right hand now. What had he written? The memory was almost in Caderousse's grasp when he heard yet another cheer go up. Today was actually a very good day for Edmond Dantes. He revealed that Monsieur Morel had friends in the courthouse. Edmund and Mercedes didn't need to wait days until they could be married. They were getting married that very afternoon, in an hour and a half. The betrothal dinner had just turned into the pair's wedding feast. Caderousse had clapped and cheered, and looked at Fernand this time. The man was sitting completely still. He was pale and sweaty, staring at Mercedes and Edmund in shock. The pain of the hangover pulsed through Caderousse's head again, and again, he strained to remember the previous afternoon. There had been a letter. Danglars wrote it as a joke. Caderousse had tried to say something, but the wine had held him back. It was about treason. No, not treason. It was a letter about a letter. A letter about Paris. Or a letter about a letter going to Paris. There were death threats. Fernand reached for his dagger, but Danglars stopped him. No one had to die, just go away. Someone roused Caderousse from his thoughts, nudging his shoulder and passing him a plate of food. He drained another glass, and his head settled down. Hair of the dog and all that. His head swimming ever so slightly, he looked at the smiling, sinister face of Danglars, the fear-racked face of Fernand, and he remembered everything. It was a prank. Danglars had been writing and talking. There was something about a letter Dantes had got from the Emperor, or someone working for the Emperor, except they didn't call the Emperor the Emperor. He went by another name now, the Usurper. There was a letter Dantes was going to take to Paris, Danglars guessed, based on the package Dantes had taken to Elba, and the fact that he not so subtly mentioned going to Paris as part of his captain's last command. Danglars had put on that strained laughter again, and said if someone truly wanted Dantes gone, all they had to do was take such a note, as the one he was writing, explaining the whole situation, address it to the king's attorney in Marseille, and if Dantes had such a letter from the usurper to the Bonapartists in Paris, it would make a lot of trouble for him. But Danglars had crumpled the letter and tossed it to the ground. It had all been a prank, after all. Even drunk, Caderousse didn't find it all that funny, but they put it out of their mind and kept talking. But Caderousse remembered one last thing. The ground was not exactly level, so he almost fell over looking back when he and Danglars were leaving. And when he did, he saw Fernand reaching for the letter that Danglars had tossed away. And Caderousse saw Danglars smile that same, just really ugly smile that he was smiling right now. "The prank," Caderousse said, taking another drink. Danglars looked over at him. "What prank? You were drunk," Danglars said, but he didn't take his eyes away from the man. "So it did happen." "Nothing happened. I tore up the note. It was a joke." No, you didn't tear it up. You crumpled it and tossed it on the ground." "You remember that?" Danglars burst, mildly impressed that someone could drink as much as Caderousse had the other day and remember anything. Caderousse looked at Fernand, sitting by Mercedes' side. He was about to open his mouth and address the man, to correct the grievous error, when they heard boots pounding and metal clanging on the stairs below. Within seconds, there were fists pounding on the door. The magistrate was there, demanding to come in. One of the soldiers quickly opened the door, and the magistrate, followed by 5 soldiers, all armed, entered the room. He had an order of arrest. Morel stood and bowed to the magistrate. The men obviously knew each other. He asked the magistrate who the man was looking for. There had to be some mistake. The magistrate stepped past Morel and demanded to know who answered to the name of Edmond Dantes. Edmond, of course, stood, and the soldiers instantly surrounded him. In the name of the law, Edmond Dantes was under arrest. The party erupted in outrage, and Edmond's father rushed to calm the guests, while also demanding why his son was being arrested. The magistrate tightened the cuffs as he explained that he didn't know. It had something to do with the ship. The magistrate sighed and paused when he looked on the elder Dante's sad face. He said it had something to do with the contents of his ship. He probably just forgot to register a certain piece of cargo. It was probably nothing. Morel comforted Edmond's father and helped the man to take a step back to give the soldiers space. There was nothing they could do here, but Morel assured Edmond that he would do absolutely everything in his power to see that this was resolved, so Edmond and Mercedes could be married, so that Edmond could be the captain of the Pharian. Caderousse watched Mercedes run to Edmond, but the soldiers were already taking him out. He yelled back from the stairs that this was just a small mistake. He would clear it up and he would return. Mercedes burst through the doors and flung herself out into the balcony. Edmond looked up at his fiancée, tears streaming down her face as she looked at him, confused. He looked up and waved as best he could. "Goodbye, Mercedes. I'll see you soon. Don't worry." His smile and the confidence of his words gave her comfort, until the soldiers turned the corner of the city street with him. Then, the clock struck 2. It was the time they were supposed to be married. Mercedes approached the man who was to be her father-in-law and buried her face in his chest. "What have you done?" Caderousse hissed, turning to Danglars. "I have done nothing," Danglars croaked, his voice hoarse. "I wrote a note as a prank." Caderousse sneered. They both knew it wasn't a prank, and he rose slightly from the table. Where was Fernand? Danglars looked around too. Fernand was likely where any smart young man would be, who just found out that he was in the company of a man arrested for treason. Somewhere else. Caderousse's hand shook. He took another drink. Danglars knew that Edmond wasn't... "I don't know anything," Danglars cut him off. "What I do know is that the king's attorney received a note saying, joking, that Dantes had a letter that he shouldn't have had. Now, do you think they'll keep him if they search his things and don't find a letter?" Caderousse thought about it, but shook his head. No, he wasn't going to stand for this. He was going to go to the king's attorney. Dantes was his neighbor. He knew the man wasn't a Bonapartist. "And what if they do find something?" Danglars added, before taking a sip of his own drink. "By all means, tell them of your little prank," Danglars said. "But I'll ask again. What if they do find something, How's it going to look? You coming to the aid of a Bonapartist in his moment of treason against the crown? How confident are you that Dantes is innocent?" Caderousse suddenly became very quiet. He settled down in his seat and took another drink. Danglars smiled. That was when he felt a tap on his shoulder. It was Morel. Things were more serious than anyone had any idea. Monsieur de Villefort thundered down the hall. This was what he was made for. He didn't care that he had been taken away from his own betrothal feast to meet with the accused. There was a Bonapartist plot right here in Marseille, and they caught the guy in the act. Villefort was ruthless. He had to be. Back during the Revolution, his father had been a Girondin, one of the many political factions during the Revolution. He hadn't voted for the death of the king, and like a lot of early revolutionaries, he had almost lost his head during the Reign of Terror. Still, having a revolutionary father did not make it easy for Villefort. That's why, as soon as he was able, he shed his father's name. He became Villefort, and after August 1814, the abdication of Napoleon, when the monarchy resumed rule of France, he began his rise. It was meteoric. He was ruthless on Bonapartists and enemies of the crown. He wasn't his father, and with every executed traitor, he put more and more distance between himself and his family name. He'd even come so far as to marry the daughter of a marquis. Soon, he would be royalty himself. He just had to meet this man, this Edmond Dantes, to find out what he knew. Then he could ship the man off to prison or the gallows and get back to his betrothal feast before they cut the cake. Unfortunately, for his plans at least, he took one look at Dantes and sighed. He didn't get this far without knowing who was guilty and who was innocent. It was a gift. If he got even the slightest scent of guilt, he attacked and didn't let up until he broke the person and they spilled everything. If they were innocent, he tried to help them. Edmond Dantes was, with one look, the latter. The man was innocent. Still, the man had reportedly been to Elba. He'd been in the presence of the usurper himself. A little bad cop couldn't hurt. Name, Villefort demanded. Edmond Dantes, the boy responded. His voice shook. What were you doing today, Monsieur Dantes, when you were arrested? Edmond replied that he was at his marriage feast. Crap, Villefort said inwardly. Outwardly, he demanded all the information Dantes had. Dantes let out a nervous chuckle. He knew very little. He had never served under the usurper. He was about to be mustered into the Royal Marines when Napoleon Bonaparte abdicated and fell. Is that so? Well, we have reports that your political opinions are extreme, Villefort asserted. They didn't. What political opinions? Dantes questioned. I legitimately have no political opinions. The only opinions I have of any type are love for my father, my employer, and my fiancée. I don't have a part to play in the games of kings and emperors. I don't want a part to play. I only want to captain my ship and return home to my father and my wife. That is all. Villefort looked on the wide-eyed kid cuffed in the chair in front of him. He, too, took a seat and let out a long sigh. You know what? I believe you, Villefort said. Dropping the act, he dug through a stack of papers on his desk until he produced the crumpled note that had been sent to him the other day. Well, it had been sent to the king's attorney, who was out. Villefort, the deputy crown prosecutor, had received it instead. He handed it to Edmond and told the young man that he had enemies. Edmond read the note and, shocked, handed it back. Villefort tossed it on the table and asked Edmond if he had any idea who wrote it. Anyone who hated him, who was jealous of his station, his wealth, his fiancée. Edmond shook his head. Everyone he knew was a friend to him. He couldn't believe someone would do this to him. Villefort took a seat across from Edmond, looked him square in the eyes, and asked him if there was any truth to the claims in this note, that Edmond had taken a package to the island of Elba and planned to go to the Bonapartist faction in Paris with a letter from the usurper. Edmond hesitated, but Villefort put a hand on his shoulder. Edmond was in some very serious trouble, and Villefort was the only one who could help him. He didn't think Edmond did anything wrong, but Edmond needed to tell him the truth. The whole truth. He had to have something to use to clear the young man's name. Edmond took a deep breath and told Villefort the truth. He had gone to Elba, but only because it was the final order of his dying captain. He considered that sacred. As part of that duty, the usurper's Grand Marshal had given Edmond a letter to take to Paris. After Edmond delivered it, the last wishes of his captain would be complete. Villefort chuckled. It was like a weight had been lifted from his chest. He smiled and looked to Edmond, who was reassured by the man's levity. Well, you aren't a traitor, You can't really fault a guy for obeying the last orders of his captain. Edmund smiled. You aren't a traitor, but you were very stupid not to say something. It's okay, though. Thank you for telling me the truth. I think you're going to be all right, Villefort said, visibly more relaxed. He asked if Edmund had the letter with him. Edmund nodded. It was actually sitting on the table right behind Villefort. They had confiscated it without even knowing. Villefort picked up the bundle of letters. The one he was looking for was right in the middle. And you didn't read it? Nope, Dantes replied. He knew nothing of it. He didn't want to know. He only knew who to deliver it to. Some guy named Nordier. Do you know him? Villefort seemed distracted, if only for a moment. No. A servant of the king doesn't know conspirators. Villefort tore open the letter and shook his head. Did anyone else know the letter from Elba? Edmund shook his head. No. Okay. So, everyone is ignorant of a letter from the usurper's men addressed to Monsieur Nordier. Edmund nodded. Yes. Okay. Good. Edmund, listen. I believe you. But this letter, it makes it difficult for you. This letter is the crown's only evidence against you, Villefort said, before flashing Edmund a smile and tossing the letter into the burning fireplace. It was the only evidence against you. I'll still have to detain you at the Palace of Justice and consult with the trial judge, just so our T's are crossed and our I's are dotted, but you should be free this evening. Hopefully you'll still have enough time to make that fiancée of yours your wife. If you're questioned by anyone other than me, that letter never existed, okay? Edmund smiled. Villefort knocked on the door of the cell, and a soldier opened it. Villefort whispered in his ear, then turned to Edmund to tell the man he was to follow the soldier now. Before leaving, Villefort turned to Edmund and told Edmund that he was a good man. The deputy prosecutor looked forward to meeting him under better circumstances. Edmund watched the prosecutor exit down the hallway, back toward his betrothal feast, and Edmund thanked God that he had such an understanding man on his case. It was well into evening when the soldiers roused Edmund from his cell in the Palace of Justice, just as Villefort had said. As he stepped out into the cool night air, he breathed deeply, happy to be free. The soldiers led him into a carriage, where he took a seat between two more. They rode into town, and then through town, and then to an area Edmund knew well. Edmund told them that if they were going to release him, really anywhere would work. But it was like he was talking to a statue. When they reached the port, they let Edmund from the carriage. As they stood waiting on a boat, Edmund asked if this was by the order of the deputy prosecutor. The soldiers said it was. Edmund hesitated, but got in the boat. Villefort was a good man. He thought so, anyway, until he heard waves breaking on the rocks and saw the prison looming in the fog. Villefort was back in his office, packing everything up for the day. It was time. They would be doing it now. He looked to the ashes. The man Edmund's letter was addressed to was a dangerous man, but not only because he was a Bonapartist and a traitor. That man, Monsieur Nordier, wasn't just some old Bonapartist. He was Villefort's father. Edmond Dantes, just by knowing to whom the letter was addressed, would never see freedom again. Villefort only had a career and a future because of the royalists, the people that hated Napoleon Bonaparte and everyone who followed him. If it was learned that Villefort's father had been communicating directly with the usurper, then Villefort's enemies would use that to destroy him. Villefort had known Edmund's fate the instant he heard his father's name. The man was as honest as he was naive. He wouldn't knowingly betray Villefort by blabbing about the letter or its recipient. But Villefort couldn't take that chance. For Villefort to be sure that his name was never associated with his father's in all this, the young man, Edmond Dantes, would die in prison. Somewhere in the city, Danglars was smiling. Morrel had assured him that Edmund would be freed soon, but in the meantime, Danglars would be named captain of the Pharian. That way, if, God forbid, Edmund didn't return, the men would still have a captain, and the ferryman could leave on time. Fernand stood closely beside the woman he loved, hand on her shoulder, comforting her as she sobbed. Catarossi sat alone at a bar. Edmund wasn't out yet, which meant that he probably wouldn't be getting out. He took another drink to silence his mind that screamed out against his weakness, his cowardice. It was raining by the time the small boat thudded violently into the port at Chateau d'If, the gloomy stronghold. The soldiers dropped all pretense and put their muskets to Edmund's back. Bewildered, Edmund had no idea that once he entered the prison at age 19, he wouldn't see the outside of it again for 14 years. That's it for the first part of the Count of Monte Cristo. What will happen to Edmund? Will Fernand take his chance with Mercedes? Does he even have a chance? What about Catarossi and his guilt? Does it eat him up after all? Next week, we'll focus on Edmund and how this naive sailor rises to become the Count of Monte Cristo. And yes, next week. Remember that Fictional is weekly for this season. In the meantime, say hi to us on Facebook or Twitter, @FictionalPod. Now it's time for the worst of the best. This is a section where I talk about a weird hero or villain, usually from comic books, but I'm trying to branch out. Anyway, the hero this time is Dog Welder from DC Comics. For the past, 30 or 40 years, comics have started blurring the line between hero and villain. Nowhere is something like that more apparent or more confusing than Dog Welder, the hero who welds dogs to people's faces. He's a member of the superhero team Section 8, which seems problematic right there. Initially, Dog Welder is a stranger possessed with the completely reasonable and common desire to somehow affix dogs, living or otherwise, to people's faces. And if you were surprised someone like Dog Welder existed, then you'll be even more surprised by Dog Welder 2. The first Dog Welder died a mystery, incinerated by a supervillain. Dog Welder 2 was a man looking through junk at a second-hand shop when he found a welding kit and a mask that just felt right. He put them on, and he knew what to do. That night, right outside the pawn shop, a well-to-do woman had a Shih Tzu welded to her face. Dog Welder 2 met up with Dog Welder 1's fellow heroes, being inexplicably drawn to the Gotham dive bar that they considered their base of operations. After the desire to weld dogs to people's faces took hold, he was consumed by it. He abandoned his family, and when they came looking for him and brought along the family dog, well, you can imagine what happened. The writers, it seemed, actually had a plan for Dog Welder. After a trip to Egypt, Dog Welder learned that he was the most recent in the line of heroes, stretching back to the time of the gods. The gods needed a psychopomp, someone to lead souls to the underworld, or the afterlife, and they had some pretty strong design ideas for what that person should look like. But they were too scared to put them into practice. They found a talented smith and tasked him with putting a dog head on a young god, thus creating Anubis, the jackal-headed psychopomp from Egyptian myth. Not happy with this new look, Anubis cursed the man to be the first dog welder, and in every age, a dog welder has existed and taken on the curse. The gods allowed it, though, because they saw far, far into the future, when a dog welder would save the universe. It was revealed that the star system Sirius was collapsing. As the hero team was sitting around their bar listening to the news, they heard the colloquial name of Sirius, the Dog Star, and Dog Welder knew why he had been given this ability. They jacked a spaceship from NASA because, yeah, and flew to the Sirius system. Dog Welder looked on his welding equipment, looked at the stars about to collide, and knew what he must do. He floated out, welder in hand, and combined with the power of 50 centuries of guys with the obsession to weld dogs to people's faces, combined the stars Sirius A and B at the point of impact. His friends were shocked, though, when he said a tearful goodbye. The combined star was now stable, and it consumed Dog Welder 2, and the curse died with him, once and for all. The heroes returned to Earth, and no one believed that a guy possessed with centuries of desires to weld dogs to people's faces had done what Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Green Lantern, no one could do, and just averted a chain reaction that would consume the whole universe. I can't imagine why no one believed that. That's it for this time. Today's episode was written by me, Jason Weiser, and edited and produced by Carissa Weiser. Our theme song is by the amazing Breakmaster Cylinder. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you next time.